In this session, we will cover Bayesian analysis of molecular sequences using the Markov chain Monte Carlo algorithms. All the concepts covered in the earlier sessions are integrated in one particular statistical Bayesian package called Bayesian Evolutionary Analysis Sampling Trees, abbreviated BEAST. BEAST is based on the theorem proposed by Reverend Thomas Bayes. He postulated that the probability of an event is based on prior information and that you can use this prior information to update the probability that the event occurred, deriving its posterior probability. Now, gathering all components of the analysis, namely genetic sequences, the phylogenetic tree, the demographic model, substitution models, and the molecular clock model, if we replace these in the Bayes theorem, then the posterior is the probability of models, the phylogeny, demographic, substitution, and molecular clock models, given the genetic sequence data. The posterior can be derived by multiplying the likelihood represented by the probability of the genetic data given the models by the prior, which is the probability of the models. All this is then divided by the marginal likelihood of the data. So, we want to calculate the posterior distribution, but it is not easy to calculate the marginal likelihood of the data due to the large number of parameters in the phylogenetic models, including the tree itself, over which the likelihood needs to be summed or integrated. That's why we used the Markov chain Monte Carlo algorithm. MCMC is a stochastic algorithm that performs a random walk on the posterior, preferentially sampling high-density areas. Here, the MCMC draws samples from the posterior and outputs a list of values that can approximate the posterior. Now, we only need to compare which posterior density is higher, so we only need the ratio of posteriors, and the marginal likelihoods cancel out. In the context of phylogenetics, the Bayesian analysis of molecular sequences using MCMC is oriented towards rooted, time-measured phylogenies inferred using strict, local, or relaxed molecular clock models. It can be used as a method of reconstructing phylogenies, but it is also a framework for testing evolutionary hypotheses without conditioning on a single tree topology. BEAST uses MCMC to average over the tree space so that each tree is weighted proportional to its posterior probability. Given this, BEAST is a natural framework to integrate different sources of information about viruses, like their sequence alignments, date of sampling, location of sampling, and others like phenotypic traits. BEAST is geared towards trees that are measured in time units, allowing inference of dispersal through time. Being a Bayesian approach, it does not attempt to estimate a single tree, but infers a posterior distribution of trees, which are all plausible hypotheses and appropriately characterize the uncertainty of our estimates. That's where Metropolis Hastings Green MCMC comes in. In mathematics and physics, the Metropolis Hastings algorithm is a method for creating a Markov chain that can be used to generate a sequence of samples from a probability distribution that is difficult to sample from directly. We can sample from this chain to reconstruct the posterior probability distribution. The frequency at which a tree or any other variable is visited will be proportional to the posterior probability of this tree or variable. Trees with higher posterior probability, represented by the red dots, will be visited more often than the initial sampling with lower posterior probability, called burn-in, and represented by the yellow dots and ellipse. The burn-in should be discarded before summarizing the results. The posterior distribution of trees can be translated to a probability of any branching event, with the advantage of allowing estimation of uncertainty, but incorporates prior beliefs. Using Bayesian statistics, we search for a set of plausible trees instead of a single best tree. In this method, we search a likelihood space that is limited by prior information. Another way to illustrate the MCMC process is with a robot metaphor. Let's imagine a robot that is programmed to explore an area. Specifically, the goal of our robot is to generate a topographic map of an unknown terrain. We deploy our robot by parachute at a random location within the terrain. The robot divides the elevation of the proposed location by the elevation of the current location. We call this quotient R. We have programmed the robot with the following rules. Slightly downhill steps are usually accepted because quotient R is near 1. Drastic, off-the-cliff downhill steps are almost never accepted because quotient R is near 0. If the robot's proposed step is not accepted, it simply stays where it is and tries again. If a proposed step will take the robot uphill with the quotient R greater than 1, it automatically takes the proposed step. The operators in BEAST are used to propose the next step, and tuning them helps the MCMC step through the state space and sample the target distribution. This process of proposing a new state, calculating the acceptance probability, and either accepting or rejecting the proposed move is repeated many thousands of times. The samples from the Markov chain form a valid, albeit dependent sample from the posterior probability distribution.